So I'm going to cover chapters 4 and 5 from the Malaise of Modernity by Charles Taylor today. 4 is entitled Inescapable Horizons, and 5 is The Need for Recognition. So the titles right there give you some idea of what we're about. But I have always... I just thought, like, the first time I read this book, as I said before, I was kind of discombobulated, and now I'm beginning to wonder if the reason why is because Charles Taylor is so patient that it's difficult to comprehend. As I read it again, his nature seems to be so kind. He's trying to explain to people how not to be this stupid as to throw away, like, something good because they don't understand it properly. So at the beginning of this chapter 4, he says, can one say anything in reason to people who are immersed in the contemporary culture of authenticity? Can you talk in reason to people who are deeply into soft relativism, or who seem to accept no allegiance higher than their own development? Say, those who seem ready to throw away love, children, democratic solidarity for the sake of some career advancement, or I would say for the sake of anything, right? So, he's capturing here, this ethic of authenticity gone bad, sort of like the spoiled version in which the person conceives of himself as a pure individual whose sole goal and reason in life ought to be to seek authenticity, which means, in this mistaken view, to find something completely and utterly free in oneself, free of other people's impositions and obligations, and, just pure self-expression kind of for its own sake. Remember, Taylor kind of ties this up to a certain extent with a type of romanticism. Again, romanticism kind of gone wrong out of the Enlightenment. So, like, the big message here is that authenticity can be a trap, right? It doesn't need to be, but if it pulls us away from others or trivializes the importance of our relationships, we've gone down the path of self-destruction. Because in his view, we literally can't achieve authenticity in this sort of artificial state as the isolated, free individual, because we're social creatures. So choice itself, he's going to tell us, cannot be the goal, okay? It doesn't make sense if all options are equally valid, which is kind of the soft and lazy position of the person who wants to argue for some form of egalitarianism. Then every option is trivialized, he argues, which is obvious. It's so obvious that it hardly needs to be saying, but he's patiently saying it. Our social nature is denied, and we do, in his view, have a social nature. The liberal ideology that makes us into these free-willing, completely autonomous individuals is just a mistake from his point of view. Self-choice, he says, as an ideal makes sense only because some issues are more significant than others. This is a good point, right? In our own minds, we really don't say, I choose this way or that way of life, this or that thing to do today, just because. But we're always attempting to kind of give it justification. It's better than what so-and-so chose. It's better than what I chose yesterday because it's more in line with my principles, or it seems to be good for me. We may be mistaken, but we're thinking these things in the back of our head. So he says authenticity can't be defended in ways that collapse horizons of significance. And he's going to argue that significance, what is significant, what we justify as significant, is determined in relationship with others. Okay? So he says, let's look at the conditions under which making a claim of authenticity even makes sense. It can't be done in a vacuum. What are the conditions in human life of realizing an ideal of this kind, he says, and what does the ideal properly understood call for? So again, he's trying to rediscover what authenticity could mean if we thought of it properly and we didn't fall into this sort of lazy and vapid relativism, which can't hold up, and we all kind of know that it can't hold up, but it's the go-to position for somebody who really doesn't want to reason about why they made the choices they've made. So he goes to the point mentioned earlier, but he defends it, that we are social creatures. So, in this regard, if we step back, we see Charles Taylor siding more with Aristotle than with Hobbes or Locke on this question of what is human nature? What kind of creatures are we? He does this in a very classic kind of Aristotelian way by saying that we are creatures who use language to communicate with each other in a very sophisticated way. And he says language not only including words, but facial expressions, bodily gestures, emotional connections, okay? And so literally we are hardwired to be social because of this. Language is socially acquired. He makes a point of that. And it presupposes society because why else would you use it, right? It is the very foundation of what makes us human as opposed to other creatures. We're social creatures. We share that with others in the animal kingdom, but we have this incredibly sophisticated ability to communicate and in the background, therefore, to reason, right? So the point that he makes here, though, is that the human mind is fundamentally hardwired for dialogue. He says it's dialogical, not monological. So if we interpret the liberal ideology to mean that we are or can be totally autonomous individuals who don't need anybody else to help us define ourselves, then we're just saying something that doesn't make sense, that ignores basic human nature. And whatever choices we make in that state of mind are going to be pretty trivial. They're not going to matter, not even to us, which I would say maybe one of the sources of angst in our modern society, that people make tons of these choices about how they're going to live, what they're going to wear, what kind of music they're going to listen to, what their entertainment should be, what their religious beliefs should be, but they never feel satisfied. And this is probably because they are trying to do it in a vacuum and they haven't really reasoned very effectively, if at all, about the choices they've made, because, as Taylor points out, they tend to have made the mistake that the choice itself is the thing that makes them free, right, and makes their life authentic. He's saying that is a really big mistake. So he then turns to this concept of horizons, right, that actually in reality our identity is and has to be constructed within the horizon that we are born into of our social nature. Now, he's not necessarily talking about strong cultures here necessarily, so he doesn't necessarily go in this Nietzschean direction of, therefore you have to have a particularly strong culture of some type to do this in the traditional sense. But he is saying that identity is formed, of course, in and through our social nature, and therefore are strongly, and he uses the term, narcissistic modes of authenticity, such as tweeting our latest, chocolate preference or whatever, are inadequate because we cannot haphazardly assign significance to whatever we want. It just becomes immediately insignificant. Our horizon as a social being means that things take on importance against a background of intelligibility, right? The background of intelligibility is what is intelligible to others, right? And so he says this is what we should call our horizon, okay? And he concludes, only if I exist in a world in which history or the demands of nature or the needs of my fellow human beings or the duties of citizenship or the call of God or something else of this order matters crucially, can I define an identity for myself that is not trivial. Authenticity is not the enemy of demands that emanate from beyond the self. It supposes such demands. Okay. Now, the person who's sort of vapidly, pursuing authenticity in our society today is likely to see these types of things, duties, citizenship, God, or just the needs of our fellow human beings, as sources of oppression kind of impinging upon their complete their complete freedom. But they don't have complete freedom, and they never did. They were born as a human being, as a social creature. And in addition to that, we've got lots of other overlays on top of that that have actually suppressed our freedom more than is required. Social media being the most contemporary example of such, in which we wake up every morning to see what everybody else thinks and is doing. If we think that our individual tweet about what chocolate or coffee we want to drink is making us an individual, we are proving his point. Okay, so couple more points. He then says, so can we really make relationships and community instrumental? Can we do that? You know, I have Locke here and a divorce proceeding, because one kind of tends to flow from the other, as the divorce proceeding tends to flow from the Lockean way of thinking. And I'm saying that in a very general sense, like the idea that our fulfillment and our choice should be paramount leads to more family and social breakups in a liberal setting than another setting. Now, we say that is the price that we pay for freedom. And I don't think that in any way Taylor wants to go back to a society where divorce or other things like this were outlawed, but he's trying to get us actually to move forward into a frame of mind where we can have the freedom without having the disastrous, relationship-shattering, society and community-shattering results that we've had. So it's very promising. He brings in Hegel, and he says, no, not if we want our dialogue to be reasonable. So among other things, Charles Taylor is defending the use of reason here. He says, you know, according to Hegel, and he agrees with this, human beings desire the recognition of others. This is why social media, by the way, is so, so strong and so insidious, is because that desire is so strong. But we live in times when our role and identity are not predetermined like they were before, where, if I was born the son of a cobbler or the daughter of a seamstress, well, that's what I would be. Okay, and I would train up and I would do that. I was a member of the lower class. I was going to stay that way. There was no way I was going to move up. And, if I was born into a Christian society, I'd be a Christian. And this was really rather unthinking. But now we live in a world where all these are presented as choices. And our role and identity are not predetermined. So if our authenticity cannot be adequately grounded in personal whim, which he has already proven, then because we do not live in those old times, right, but with choices that we're conscious of, then we should prefer a strong dialogue with a good dose of reason, rather than saying, oh, it's just me, respect me, right? I don't have to give you a reason. We should prefer reason, and to get strong dialogue with a good dose of reason, you've got to have strong community, stronger than the thin liberal community, so to speak, that we have, the social contract community. So he says it's reasonable to place a priority on the stability of personal relationships, both of the individual type, as in marriage, family, romantic relationships as well, of all kinds. It's reasonable to place a priority on the stability of those, because through dialogue with the significant other, you will be able to think through what your authenticity ought to be, or what you should be authentic about, right? Same thing with participation in social and political relationships. They should be stronger. They should matter more. He talks about participatory, political settings, right? That it's not good enough simply to have this very kind of loose idea that, more or less you're going to show up to the voting booth every once in a while and think about your self-interest, but that's all, okay? So this means that you would prefer to have a situation where people aren't encouraged to walk away from relationships or to switch them up whenever their personal whims dictate otherwise, right? And to think of their relationships with those people in their community as permanent enough that they need to be in continual dialogue with them. And through that, they will then be able to sort out with more sense and more reason what is truly meaningful to them. right? In a way, I think he's saying that we have to let go of this ideal of perfect uniqueness, right? And have these things in common with others, the desire to have a dialogue, the desire to grow through our relationships with others. We have to let go of the idea of, absolute uniqueness, which is impossible, in order to pursue something much deeper in the way of authenticity. So the conclusion here is that the typical liberal individualism and half-witted relativism is not good enough. All right. So I feel like Charles Taylor is kind of schooling people in how not to be so stupid. We all need that lesson every once in a while. So on to the slide to subjectivism, which is the next chapter next time. Bye.